The air was thick with the scent of blood and damp earth. Tall, ancient trees loomed overhead, their gnarled roots snaking through the soil like veins in the flesh of the world. Shafts of pale blue sunlight filtered through the canopy, glinting off the sleek, black armor of the alien hunting party as they moved through the wilderness. Their elongated, reptilian forms moved with practiced grace, their clawed feet barely making a sound against the soft undergrowth. Captain Varnak led the pack, his golden eyes scanning the terrain with cold amusement. This was supposed to be a game, a demonstration of dominance. Humans, the so-called pets of the Galactic Empire, were weak things, barely capable of surviving without the Empire's scraps. And yet, here they were, sent on an extermination hunt, ridding one of the Empire's game reserves of a few straggling, wild-born humans. A formality, really. Scan for heat signatures, Varnak muttered, his voice a gravelly purr through his helmet's comms. A subordinate tapped on a wrist device, and a holographic projection sprang to life, casting a translucent red overlay across the jungle. Faint thermal traces flickered in the distance. Movement detected. Small signatures. Likely one of the primates, or those scavenger dogs they call coyotes. Varnak snorted. Anything bigger. There. The soldier pointed at a single heat signature farther ahead. Humanoid. A slow smile stretched across the captain's scaled lips. A human. Isolated. They advanced with predatory precision, weapons poised. The jungle was silent, but for the whisper of leaves brushing against armor. Then they saw her. The woman was standing in the clearing, motionless, as if she had been expecting them. She was tall for a human, lean but muscled, her skin streaked with dirt and dried blood. Long, dark hair was tied back, exposing high cheekbones and piercing green eyes that gleamed in the shadows. She held no weapon, at least none they could see, but the way she stood, shoulders squared, feet firm against the ground, unsettled Varnak. Reina Vale. She had been little more than a child when the Empire took Earth, but the reserves had hardened her into something else entirely. Something that didn't cower. One of the hunters chuckled, stepping forward. Look at this, Captain. A stray. Raina said nothing. She simply watched them, her expression unreadable. Drop to your knees, another hunter sneered. You're not even worth a chase. Varnak gestured for silence. He had seen something move at Raina's feet. A small, squat creature, no taller than her shin, slunk from the undergrowth. Black-furred, stocky, with beady eyes like twin coals. The soldiers erupted into laughter. A pet? How fitting, one of them jeered. Is this supposed to protect you? The honey badger bared its teeth. Raina didn't react. She only whispered, Scar. The alien who had laughed the loudest reached down, moving to grab the tiny creature. Scar moved faster. A blur of muscle and fury, the badger lunged, jaws clamping onto the hunter's outstretched hand. Bone crunched. The soldier screamed, staggering back, trying to shake the creature loose. But Scar didn't let go. He bit deeper, shredding sinew like wet paper. Blood sprayed in thick, pulsing arcs as the hunter fell backward, shrieking. Varnak's amusement curdled. The other hunters raised their weapons, but Raina was already moving. In a flash, she closed the gap between her and the wounded alien, yanking the plasma rifle from his grasp. A single, deafening shot rang out, and the closest soldier dropped, a smoking hole where his throat had been. Scatter! Varnak roared. The jungle erupted into chaos. Raina disappeared into the trees, Scar vanishing with her, leaving only the corpse of the fallen hunter and the blood-slicked dirt where she had stood. Varnak's hands clenched into fists. This was supposed to be an easy hunt, a demonstration. Instead, they had become the hunted. The jungle was silent again, but not in peace. It was the silence of something lurking, something unseen, yet felt in every shift of the wind and rustle of the leaves. The surviving hunters moved in a tight formation now, their arrogance bleeding away with the corpse of their fallen brother. What was meant to be a leisurely culling had turned into something far worse, something they didn't understand. Captain Varnak's golden eyes swept the dense undergrowth. The woman had disappeared, but she hadn't run in fear. That much was clear. She had retreated with intent, with purpose, and that made her dangerous. "She's just one human," a soldier muttered, but Varnak could hear the strain in his voice. "One human who has already killed two of us," Varnak replied coldly. "If you underestimate her again, I will personally skin you myself." The jungle stretched endlessly before them, a tangled mass of roots, thick vines, and the ever-present shadows that moved as if alive. Their scanners flickered, glitching, struggling to distinguish the ambient heat from an actual target. The terrain was primitive, but in this moment, it belonged to her. They moved forward cautiously, weapons raised. The air grew thick with the scent of damp earth and something sharper, blood, old and fresh, mingling together. The hunter who had lost his hand to the honey badger was slumped against a tree, breath coming in ragged gasps. The stump of his wrist had been hastily cauterized, but his eyes were glassy with shock. "Leave him," Varnak said. "Dead weight." The wounded soldier's breathing hitched. "See, Captain." Varnak silenced him with a single glance. The Empire did not tolerate weakness. Something moved, a blur among the leaves. Contact left. A hunter barked, swinging his rifle toward the movement. Nothing. Another rustling sound, this time from the right. Right. No, left again. They were being toyed with. Stalked. Then, the first trap triggered. A sharp, whistling snap rang out as a soldier cried in agony, yanked off his feet. A crude but efficient snare, a vine tightened around his ankle, hoisting him upside down into the air. His rifle clattered to the ground. Before he could even reach for his knife, a sharpened stake, smeared with something dark, swung down from the canopy. It punched clean through his chest, silencing his screams in an instant. The jungle swallowed the sound. The remaining soldiers froze, their training clashing with a more primal instinct, the knowledge that they were no longer in control. Varnak's breathing remained steady, but his claws flexed against his rifle. A single, mocking whistle cut through the air. A signal, a warning. Then the second trap sprung. The ground beneath one of the hunters collapsed, a hidden pitfall swallowing him whole. His panic shout was cut off by a wet crunch as sharpened spikes impaled him from below. Panic rippled through the squad. Their numbers were thinning too fast, their enemy unseen. Varnak's jaw tightened. "Form up. Do not separate." The jungle was betraying them at every turn. The sounds of the wind, the distant calls of unseen animals, each one now a possible sign of attack. Their training had not prepared them for this. A blur of motion from the trees. Raina struck fast. A blade flashed, stolen from one of the fallen, and sank deep into another soldier's side before he could react. She moved like a ghost, a shadow, vanishing just as another hunter turned his rifle toward her. The soldier she had stabbed fell to his knees, gasping, hands pressed to the wound. "Poison," he choked. His body twitched, convulsed. Then he stilled. Raina's voice, smooth as the wind, carried through the jungle. "You shouldn't have come here." A snarl of rage erupted from the remaining hunters. One of them fired wildly into the underbrush, plasma bolts scorching bark, burning leaves but hitting nothing. A guttural, angry chittering noise echoed next. Scar. Then came the screaming. The badger was a streak of pure savagery, launching from the underbrush onto the nearest alien's back. The soldier thrashed, but Scar's claws dug deep, his teeth finding the soft, exposed flesh at the base of the skull. A single, powerful bite. Silence. The last two hunters stood rigid, bodies trembling despite their armor. Their training had not prepared them for this. Varnak exhaled slowly. He had underestimated her. He would not do so again. A flicker of movement caught his eye. She was there, crouched in the darkness between the trees, watching. And she was smiling. Varnak tightened his grip on his weapon. The jungle was no longer a battlefield. It was a graveyard. His hunters, elite warriors of the Empire, had been reduced to corpses scattered among the trees, their deaths swift and unceremonious. The air was thick with the scent of burned plasma, blood, and something fouler, the acrid stench of fear. He was down to 2 soldiers now, and neither looked eager to press forward. Their rigid stances betrayed the truth. They weren't hunting anymore. They were waiting, hoping their predator would lose interest. That would not happen. Varnak had spent his life dominating lesser species, culling them, breaking them, leashing them under the Empire's banner. He had seen human captives before, sniveling, trembling things, useful only as entertainment or expendable workers. But this was no ordinary human. This was something else. Reina Vale had turned this jungle into her domain. A rustling to the left sent both soldiers jerking their weapons in that direction, fingers tense on the triggers. Leaves shifted, but nothing emerged. The right. Another sound. Varnak exhaled through his nostrils. "She's baiting us," he said flatly. One of his remaining soldiers, Reina, swallowed hard. "Captain, we need to fall back. Regroup with reinforcements." Varnak turned his head slowly, golden eyes narrowing. "And tell the Empire what? That a single human wiped out an entire hunting squad." Reina licked his lips, but he had no answer. The silence stretched. Then the killing started again. The second soldier, Kos, gave a strangled noise as something whipped around his throat. A vine. No, a snare. Reina's work. He was yanked backward, feet dragging across the dirt. He managed to get a shot off, but the angle was wrong, the plasma bolt shooting wild into the trees. Varnak turned just in time to see her emerge from the underbrush, a blade glinting in the dim light. She moved like a wraith, fast, precise, driving the knife into Kos's exposed neck. He gargled wetly. Then he dropped. Reina panicked, firing wildly, plasma rounds cutting through the air. Raina was already gone. Varnak didn't move. He didn't speak. Reina's breath came in rapid, heaving gasps. We have to get out of here, Captain. We have to." A low, chittering growl cut him off. Reina spun, eyes wide. Scar was there. The honey badger's fur was slick with blood, his beady eyes burning with something primal. "No!" The creature lunged. Reina screamed, stumbled back, fell. He clawed at the dirt, trying to crawl away as Scar tore into him. Varnak didn't waste time watching. He ran. The jungle twisted around him as he sprinted, his body moving on sheer survival instinct. He had never run from a fight before. Never. But this was not a fight. This was a massacre. His mind raced. He needed higher ground. A signal. A chance to call for a retrieval vessel before it was too late. Branches tore at his armor. His breaths were ragged, but he pushed forward. Then the jungle ended. A cliff's edge. He skidded to a stop, rocks tumbling down the sheer drop below. His heart hammered his chest. Behind him, a slow, deliberate set of footsteps approached. He turned. Raina stood there, bloodied, dirt-streaked but calm. In one hand, she held a plasma rifle, his fallen soldier's weapon. In the other, her blade, dark with fresh crimson. Varnak straightened, forcing down the fear threatening to choke him. "This isn't possible," he said, voice low. "You're just a human." Raina tilted her head. "That's what you thought." Scar emerged from the brush, his fur bristling, his snarl deep and guttural. Varnak's claws flexed. His mind raced through every possible outcome. None were good. He had one chance. His muscles tensed. Then he lunged. Varnak moved like lightning, his claws flashing toward Raina's throat. He had one chance, one desperate gamble. His species had always been faster, stronger, deadlier. She was just a human. She had to be slower. She had to be weaker. She wasn't. Raina sidestepped his lunge with ease, pivoting smoothly as his momentum carried him forward. In that fraction of a second, she slammed the butt of the plasma rifle into the side of his skull. Bone cracked. The world spun. Varnak stumbled, but he didn't fall. He let the pain fuel him, pushing through it, turning on his heel with another strike. His claws raked toward her midsection. She dropped, sliding low beneath the swing, her knife carving across the back of his knee. A snarl ripped from his throat as pain exploded up his leg. He collapsed to one knee, breath ragged, but he refused to submit. His tail lashed out, catching Raina in the ribs and sending her rolling across the dirt. She recovered fast, pushing to her feet with practiced ease. Varnak was slower. His body screamed at him to move, to attack, but his limbs were sluggish. His breaths came in short, shallow gasps. His knee throbbed. His balance was compromised. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He was losing. He, the apex predator, the hunter, the warlord, was losing to a human. Raina rolled her shoulders, exhaling through her nose. You should have stayed in the sky, alien. Varnak bared his fangs, blood dripping down his temple. You think you've won? She tilted her head slightly, then gestured to the corpses littering the jungle behind her. You tell me. Varnak's chest heaved. His claws twitched. His mind screamed at him to fight, to kill, to rip her apart. But instincts, the same instincts that had kept his kind at the top of the food chain for centuries, were screaming something else. Run. His tail coiled. His muscles tensed. He lunged, not at her, but past her, toward the cliff's edge. Raina's eyes widened, realizing his intent. Varnak pushed off the ground with every ounce of strength he had left, his body arching through the air, reaching. A blur of black and white slammed into him mid-leap. Scar. The honey badger struck like a missile, his teeth latching onto Varnak's arm, claws ripping into flesh. The force of the impact sent them both careening sideways, away from the edge, crashing hard into the dirt. Varnak roared, trying to shake the beast off, but Scar was relentless. The badger twisted, dug in deeper, tearing muscle from bone. Raina was on him before he could react. She drove the plasma rifle's muzzle into his chest and pulled the trigger. The first shot burned straight through his armor. The second tore a hole through his ribs. The third ended it. Varnak slumped back, his breath hitching once, then stopping. His golden eyes, once filled with arrogance and cruelty, stared blankly at the sky. Raina exhaled slowly, lowering the rifle. Scar released his grip, his muzzle smeared with blood. He shook himself off, sneezing once before padding over to Raina's side. She knelt, running a hand through the thick fur of his neck. We did it, buddy. Scar chittered in response, nudging her with his head. The jungle was silent once more, not with fear this time, but with finality. Raina pushed herself to her feet. Her body ached, her ribs bruised, her muscles screaming in protest. But she was alive, and more importantly, the Empire's hunters were not. She turned, glancing toward the sky. Somewhere up there, beyond the atmosphere, an Imperial ship was waiting. Varnak's team had been arrogant, but they wouldn't have come alone. More would come, but now they would come knowing fear. She smirked. Let them.